Here we are at the Buttertubs Marsh, and I'm pleased to invite you here on this beautiful afternoon. My name is Bill Merrilees. I'm a former member of the Nanaimo Field Naturals Club, and I guess for most of my time I've been a chair of the Friends of Buttertubs Committee. Our role is strictly a volunteer organization that works with the Nature Trust of British Columbia, which own the property. We have dealings with the city of Nanaimo because it is within their area and they consider it sort of part of one of their recreation areas. And of course there's the community of Nanaimo at large that comes here on a regular basis for just the sheer enjoyment of nature. We have over the years petitioned various governments to add different pieces of property to the marsh. We've sort of doubled its size now. And we've got two or three additional pieces that will probably take a little bit more time, but eventually we should have the area up to about maybe 50 or 60 hectares. And most of it will be away from the public. The East Marsh, which is the central part which we're on here that has the trail around it, will remain as is. This will be the public part of it, and the rest of it will be for the quiet use of scientists and other people. Vancouver Island University is just on the hill behind us, and they have a bird banding program which goes on in the West Marsh, and they've been operating this for a number of years, and tucked away quietly. They have developed quite a program there, and I don't know how many thousand birds they band each year or have banded in the course of their history, but the students have a great opportunity there, and we've got plans to manage water levels a little better than what we've been doing, and hopefully we can get it so there's more projects that students can get involved in over the years. But it's just such a marvelous place with such a diversity, from research to recreation to just quiet protection and preservation, that we are exceedingly lucky. Buttertubs is a fascinating wetland that goes back right to the very beginning of Nanaimo. People don't realize that Nanaimo was based on coal. It was discovered in the early 1850s, which is about 8 years before the great gold rush on the Fraser River. So this was the first real industry for the province of British Columbia on the coast. The Hudson Bay Company, when they discovered coal here, of course immediately set out to look at their surroundings and see what they had. And one of the places that they found was, of course, the Millstone River was here, and Pemberton and Pierce, the two surveyors, surveyed it. And we have a copy of Pierce's map from 1865 that shows a big area here called the swamp. And they had a heck of a time getting through the swamp, because what it was the widening of the Millstone River. And in the wintertime, when we have our heavy rains here, the river rose. There's a natural dam down where the Comox Hotel is. And as a result of that, the water in here would flood and turn it into a great big marsh. And then in the springtime and the summertime, as it warmed up, the waters would all drop, and it became a great big, just a swamp. Well, they had all their horses and cattle and so on, which the community depended on, not only for their community, but also for coal mining, but they needed a source of forage. And it just so happened that the grasses and sedges in Buttertubs became a likely source, and so the area was drained. And because there were lots of miners around, it wasn't a great big job. They just went down along the Millstone River, dug it out about 6 or 8 feet, drained it down so that they could get on the land earlier in the year. And this is where they had their first company farm, where they would grow turnips and potatoes and carrots, vegetables that they could keep over the winter time. They could cut the grass and forage and have that for their horses and cattle. So it brought Nanaimo some early significance as far as agricultural products were concerned, because the community became self-sufficient, and that was very important. Quite a while elapsed, and of course, it being a marsh and a swamp and flooding in winter and so on, it wasn't selected for house construction or anything like that, so it was just left. And finally, in the 1960s, with the celebration of British Columbia joining Confederation, funds were left over from the celebrations around the province, and some very wise British Columbians, politicians and educators like the McTaggart Cowan and Rifle and those types of people got together and they petitioned Pierre Trudeau to take the surplus funds and put it into a fund which they called the National Second Century Fund. And the purpose of the National Second Century Fund was to purchase ecologically significant lands around British Columbia for the preservation and appreciation of nature. And it just so happens that Buttertubs was the second property that they acquired, and mainly through the efforts of the local staff of the Fish and Game branch in Nanaimo. And so what we call the East Marsh, which is from me forward behind the cameraman, was the East Marsh, and this was the piece that was originally acquired. And a trail was put around the marsh. The area we're standing on is a city water line, which gave us a dike which split the marsh directly in two. A couple of years ago, at the sort of the bequest of the Nanaimo field naturalists and other parties, we asked that the West Marsh be acquired and added to the East Marsh, and the city of Nanaimo stepped forward with the partnership of Ducks Unlimited, and it was acquired. So we ended up with two large pieces of property, each of about 30 hectares, and that is the majority of the marsh. We've since added to that about 5 or 6 little pieces, and we still have about 5 or 6 more little pieces to go, and we hope we can get the area up to about 45 hectares in due course. But it's a wonderful area. We recognize now that about 70,000 people walk Buttertubs every year. A lot of them are seniors. A lot of them are people, caregivers to other people, like we saw just as we arrived, John, and so on. And of course, it's a tremendous mecca for bird watchers. If you're on the local bird hotline or whatever, there's a Bohemian waxwing at Buttertubs, and 1,000 people come running out to see the Bohemian waxwing, or there's a turtle, a red spotted turtle dove or something like that, and they all come flocking out here. So it's really quite interesting and so on. And we have an active beaver population, we have an active muskrat population, we have mink here as well, river otter. It's really quite a mecca, and to have this right in the center of the city, you can hear the highway on this side, you can hear the highway on that side, and people basically love Buttertubs to death. But the really good part is that the trails around the marsh don't permit easy access to the water. Lots and lots of Himalayan blackberry, which produce lots of nice blackberries for people to pick in late July and August, but they can't get into the marsh. So you can sort of a place that you can look into and see lots of things, but you can't get into it. And so that's perhaps the real charm of it. And the Nanaimo Field Naturals Club, which is now known as Nature Nanaimo, were the first sort of arbitrary stewards of the area, and I became chairman of what was called the Buttertubs Marsh Liaison Committee, and I would liaise with the city of Nanaimo and Ducks Unlimited and so on. And we had a lot of successes, and we had a lot of axe grinding and so on, but we've done very, very well. And I'm quite happy with what we have here, although there's always room for improvement, and we keep aiming for that. So we're really, really lucky here in Nanaimo to have right in the center a wildlife area that attracts dozens and dozens of species, migrant ducks in particular, and so on. And just with a little bit of patience, you can wait. You can see beaver, river otter, mink, muskrat, and we have bears, and every once in a while there's a cougar seen in here, I guess trying to pick up local dogs and cats, I'm not sure. But anyway, it's really quite interesting. So it's an interesting dynamic, and we're just so lucky to have an area such as that here. So that's the story from Coal Town to Buttertubs. So here we have a nice comprehensive view over what we call the East Marsh. This is the first piece of property purchased by the Nature Trust of British Columbia, and it's interesting over the years just to watch and see the changes. These islands of cattail, people don't realize are floating, and in the wintertime when the water levels rise, they all rise up, and the winds blow them north, south, and across, and every time you come here there's a different configuration. And if you look at aerial photographs, it's really quite remarkable that if they're taken a month or two apart, you can see how all the islands have moved in a pattern that reflects the prevailing winds. But what you can see now is because the waters here were always shallow, one of the things I didn't mention in my introduction was that After the company farm was abandoned by the Hudson Bay Company, a private farm was here, and there was a dairy involved, and on the far side of the marsh there's a place you'll find the old dairy barn. And the local kids used to come down in the wintertime into the dairy barn, bring their ice skates down, put them on, go for skating on the pond. That was good. But before that, during the Second World War, there was an army training camp here. And the marsh was used for tank training, so they used to drive their tanks through. And so that really chewed the place up. So when the fellow at the end of the war went back to his property, it was nicely sort of mowed and plowed with lots of furrows. And he got milk from his cows and so on, and that carried on. The tower, the base of it, was the communications tower between the army base between Nanaimo and Vancouver. And at the end of the war, it became the tower for Chubb Radio, which was Nanaimo's radio station at that time, CHUB. And so that was, they transmitted. Well, now, of course, technology for radio transmission is so changed that they don't need towers and things of that nature anymore. So Buttertubs basically has quiesced to a quiet marsh where students come and can read leaning up against the walls here, or sitting on the benches and chairs, or seniors can bring their partners and so on and so forth and just take an easy walk around the marsh. And as I say, we get somewhere between 75 and about 100,000 people walking the trail here every year. And it's just wonderful to see all the sharing that goes on between caregivers and their patrons, I guess, or their patients. So it's just a wonderful, quiet place for meditation. And Nanaimo is exceedingly lucky to have such a marvelous area right within the city, and everybody can make use of it with ease. Well, here at Buttertubs, it's been over the years a marvelous partnership with a lot of different organizations participating when and where they can, and we're so lucky that we've been able to have the city, the Nature Trust of British Columbia, which basically owns the property, Ducks Unlimited, the Canadian Wildlife Service, and other groups like that are all sort of pitch in from time to time to ensure that Buttertubs remains a beautiful natural area in the city of Nanaimo. And the primary organization there is the Nature Trust of BC. It is the property, they were the first owners of the first piece of property, and they partnership with many of the other secondary properties that have been acquired. So they are the lead organization in this, and if you want further information, you can contact the Nature Trust of BC.